You will never see their names on a billionaire list. Forbes does not count their wealth. Governments do not tax it. Because the families who truly own this world learned centuries ago that visible wealth is vulnerable wealth. The richest people you know about are employees. The ones you do not know about are owners. Not owners of companies, owners of systems, owners of the machinery that creates money itself. And once you understand how they built their empires, you will never look at a bank, a war, or a government the same way again. Let us begin with a number, $1 trillion. Say it slowly, 1 trillion. It sounds almost manageable when spoken quickly, just another large figure. So let us make it real. If you earn $10,000 every single day, it would take you 274,000 years to accumulate $1 trillion. That is longer than modern humans have existed. If you stacked $1 trillion in $100 bills, the pile would reach beyond the International Space Station. It would take a commercial airplane 4 days of continuous flight just to pass over your money. Now, there are families on this planet whose combined wealth, held across generations, across trusts, across shell companies and sovereign funds and private banks, exceeds this number. Not by a little, by multiples. And they have held this wealth not for decades, but for centuries. While your great-great-grandfather was working someone else's field, their great-great-grandfather was financing the war that determined which king would own that field. This is not the same species of wealth. This is not even the same game. The difference between you and them is not intelligence. It is not work ethic. It is not education. The difference is that they understood something 300 years ago that most people still do not understand today. Money is not wealth. Money is a tool for extracting wealth from others, and the greatest tool ever invented for this extraction is debt. Not personal debt, although they profit from that too. Sovereign debt, government debt, the debts of nations. When a country borrows money, it mortgages the future labour of every citizen who will ever live in that country. Someone must collect on that mortgage. Someone must hold the paper. And for 3 centuries, the same families have positioned themselves as the holders of that paper. They do not work for money. Money works for them. And the money working for them is money that you, your children, and your grandchildren have not yet earned. The Rothschild family began as court Jews in the Frankfurt ghetto, a small family running a coin trading business in the 18th century. Within 1 generation, they became the most powerful financial force in Europe. How? Not through invention, not through manufacturing, through understanding one simple truth. Kings need money for wars, wars are expensive, taxes are slow, but loans are immediate. Meyer Amschel Rothschild placed his 5 sons in 5 European capitals: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt. They created the first international banking network, an octopus with tentacles in every major throne room. When Napoleon marched across Europe, the Rothschilds financed both sides. Not because they cared who won, because whoever won would owe them money, and whoever lost would owe them money. War was not a catastrophe to be avoided. War was a business opportunity to be cultivated. The Battle of Waterloo made the family legend. Nathan Rothschild in London received news of Napoleon's defeat before anyone else, carried by a network of couriers and carrier pigeons that outpaced official channels. While the rest of London believed Wellington had lost, Nathan began selling. Panic spread. Prices collapsed. And then, at the bottom, Nathan bought everything. When the real news arrived, he owned a significant portion of the British economy at pennies on the pound. This was not luck. This was infrastructure. The Rothschilds had invested in something more valuable than gold. They had invested in information, in speed, in being first. While others played the game, they had redesigned the board. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschild family fortune was estimated at £600 million. Adjusted for inflation and economic share, some historians calculate this made them the wealthiest family in modern history. But here is what matters more than the number. They did not hold this wealth in cash. They held it in influence. They financed the Suez Canal. They bankrolled the British acquisition of the canal shares in a 48-hour secret deal that reshaped global shipping. They funded railways across Europe and South America. They lent to governments that then became dependent on their goodwill for future credit. This is the mechanism. You do not buy power, you finance it, and then power owes you. Now across the Atlantic, John D. Rockefeller did not inherit wealth. He built it through oil, through Standard Oil, through a monopoly so complete that at its height, it controlled 90% of American refining capacity. But Rockefeller understood something that his competitors did not. Oil was just the beginning. The real game was integration. He controlled the wells, the pipelines, the railroads that shipped the oil, the banks that financed the operation, the politicians who wrote the regulations. He created a closed loop where every transaction enriched him twice. Once when oil was extracted, again when it was transported, again when it was refined, again when it was sold, and always through banks that he controlled or influenced. When the Supreme Court broke up Standard Oil in 1911, the public celebrated. The monopoly was dead, except it was not. The pieces of Standard Oil became Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, and others. The Rockefeller family retained shares in all of them. Breaking up the company was like cutting a starfish into pieces. Each piece grew into a new creature, and the family owned a part of each. Their wealth did not decrease. It multiplied and diversified. And as the 20th century progressed, the Rockefellers shifted from oil to banking. Chase Manhattan Bank, from banking to influence. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. Foundations that shaped policy, funded universities, and determined what ideas were respectable and what ideas were fringe. They stopped being businessmen. They became architects of reality. Here is what separates these families from ordinary billionaires. An ordinary billionaire has a lot of money. These families have a lot of power. The difference is that money can be lost, taxed, inflated away. Power perpetuates itself. When you fund the university, you influence what is taught. When you finance the politician, you influence what is legislated. When you own the bank that lends to the government, you influence what is possible. You do not need to bribe anyone. You simply fund the institutions that produce the people who make decisions. By the time they reach positions of authority, their worldview has already been shaped by your grants, your fellowships, your endowments. They are not your puppets, they are your products. This is not conspiracy. This is strategy executed over generations. A conspiracy requires secrecy and coordination. This requires only patience and compound interest. Plant a seed today, water it for 50 years. Your grandchildren harvest a forest. Normal families think in terms of years. These families think in terms of centuries. Normal families want their children to succeed. These families want their bloodlines to rule. The psychology is entirely different. You're playing checkers on a board they designed for chess. Consider the math of dynastic wealth. If a family has $1 billion and earns a conservative 5% annual return, they gain $50 million per year without lifting a finger. That is $137,000 per day. Every day they wake up before breakfast, they've earned more than most people earn in 3 years. Now scale this to 100 billion, to 1 trillion spread across trusts and holding companies and private banks. The returns are so large they become meaningless to spend. You cannot consume this wealth. You can only deploy it, and deployment means influence, investment, control. What do they buy? They buy silence, privacy that you cannot imagine, estates that do not appear on maps, security details larger than those of heads of state. They buy access, a phone call to a prime minister, private dinner with a central banker, a seat at tables that do not officially exist. They buy time, lawyers who delay justice for decades, accountants who move money through jurisdictions like water through pipes, leaving no trace. They buy legacy, museums that bear their names but not their crimes, charitable foundations that launder reputations across generations. The great-grandchildren of robber barons are now philanthropists. The blood has been washed away by time and public relations. And what do you get? You get to work. You get to pay interest on your mortgage to banks they own. You get to fill your car with gasoline from companies they founded. You get to vote for politicians whose campaigns they funded. You get to send your children to universities whose curricula they shaped. You get to watch news on networks whose owners attend the same gatherings. You get to live inside a system designed over centuries to move wealth upward and keep it there. And you get to believe that you are free. The most elegant prisons are the ones where the inmates do not know they are prisoners, where the bars are made of ideology and the locks are made of debt, where escape is technically possible but practically unthinkable because the very idea of escape has been removed from the available options. You can choose Coke or Pepsi, Ford or Chevrolet, Republican or Democrat, but you cannot choose a world where money does not rule. That option is not on the menu. The menu was written by people whose names you do not know, in rooms you will never enter, using wealth accumulated before your grandparents were born. There will be no revolution against these families. Revolutions require a target, and these targets are invisible. You cannot storm a private bank in Switzerland. You cannot occupy a family office in Luxembourg. You cannot vote out a dynasty that holds no office. They exist in the gaps between nations, in the spaces where jurisdiction blurs and accountability evaporates. They are not above the law, they are beside it in a parallel structure that the law was not designed to touch. What happens when the system cracks? It cracks for everyone else first. In 2008, banks failed. Ordinary people lost homes. The families who owned those banks received bailouts funded by ordinary people's taxes. The crisis was not a failure of the system. It was the system working exactly as designed. Losses were socialized, gains remained private, the transfers continued, they always continue. Some will say this is paranoid, that these families are just lucky, just smart, just hardworking across many generations. Perhaps. But luck does not build intelligence networks that outpace governments. Smart does not finance both sides of a war. Hardworking does not create tax structures in 12 jurisdictions simultaneously. What we are observing is not fortune, it is engineering, social engineering, financial engineering, political engineering, conducted over timescales that make it invisible to those who live and die within a single generation. You were born into a game that started centuries before you arrived. The rules were written by players who are still playing, whose grandchildren will still be playing when your grandchildren are dust. The chips were distributed long ago, and every year the house takes its percentage. You can work harder, you can invest smarter, you can do everything right, and you will still be rounding error in their accounting. This is not a call to despair, it is a call to clarity, to understand the architecture you inhabit, to see the walls you were told were horizons. They want you to believe the system is neutral, that wealth is earned, that anyone can rise, and anyone can, from the bottom to the middle, from the middle to the comfortable. But from the comfortable to the stratosphere where they breathe? That door closed generations ago. What remains is a performance of opportunity, a lottery with a few winners, enough to keep everyone buying tickets. The names you know are distractions. The names you do not know are the ones that matter, and they prefer it that way. Visibility is liability. Obscurity is power. The greatest trick the dynasties ever pulled was convincing the world they no longer existed, that aristocracy died with the old regimes, that we live now in meritocracy, while their trust compound and their influence deepens, and their grandchildren marry each other in ceremonies you will never see. Somewhere tonight, in a room without windows, decisions are being made about the value of your currency, the stability of your job, the price of your home. The people making those decisions do not know your name, and you do not know theirs. That asymmetry is not an accident. It is the product. It is the point. It is the design working perfectly, as it has for 300 years. And tomorrow you will wake up and go to work, and so will they. Except their work is owning, and your work is being owned, and the distance between you grows every single day, invisibly, inexorably, while you wonder why you feel tired all the time.